This is Sony's new flagship phone, the Xperia 1 Mark IV. It brings all the goodies you'd expect from a high-end 2022 phone, along with a bunch of proprietary Sony features as well. So is the Xperia 1 Mark IV the flagship you need in your life? I'm Will for GSM Arena, and let's find out in our full review. The Xperia 1 Mark IV has a very familiar, tall, flat, and slim design. It's very similar to last year's model, but this time all the color schemes are matte. The matte black finish looks nice, and it does a good job at hiding fingerprints and smudges. Both the back panel and the aluminum frame are flat, and they meet at a sharp edge that provides some extra grip. Like last year, the front is protected by shatter-resistant Gorilla Glass Victus. And now the back has Victus as well, making the build overall a bit sturdier. Just like before, the new model is water resistant, with both an IP65 and an IP68 certification. Another feature that is returned is the fingerprint reader built into the power button, but it's larger now. It's always on and very fast. And just like on last year's Xperia Pro I, you get a dedicated two-step camera shutter. The first step is for focus, and if there's a human or animal subject, the phone will use eye autofocus, automatically locking on to the subject's eye. The Xperia 1 Mark IV also has a few old-school features that you don't see on flagships these days. There's microSD expandable storage on top of the 256 or 512 gigs built in. The selfie cam sits in the top bezel rather than a cutout, and there's also a notification LED. And last but not least, you get a regular 3.5mm jack for plugging in headphones too. Besides the headphones, for your audio, the Xperia 1 Mark IV also offers a pair of full-stage, front-facing stereo speakers. The speakers are slightly louder than on last year's model, earning a score of good in our loudness test. The sound, however, is deeper and richer, with noticeable boost in the bass. One cool feature is dynamic vibration. You can enable it next to the volume controls, and it allows the phone to vibrate along with the sound of your media. We also want to mention this screen's great haptic feedback. It's really precise, vibrating right on the spot that you touch. Speaking of the screen, it's pretty much the same as last year, a 6.5-inch OLED with a 120Hz refresh rate and an impressive 4K resolution. Even though this screen is identical specs-wise, Sony claims that it's brighter this time around, and we confirmed that in our tests. On the Mark III, the panel's max brightness was different between the manual slider and auto mode, and you'd get different max brightness ceilings depending on your color profile. But the Mark IV can provide over 600 nits maximum regardless. The most we measured was 680. That's more than enough for good sunlight legibility, but still a bit behind the competition. The Xperia 1 Mark IV's panel is one of the sharpest around, at 643 ppi. The 4K resolution isn't always active though. The phone will fall back to an extended Full HD resolution for most day-to-day use to save energy, and then output in 4K for a limited set of tasks such as video playback. Anyway, the picture is crisp, clear, and contrasty. The Xperia 1 Mark IV is HDR10 video certified, but there is no Dolby Vision support. It does have a new real-time HDR video drive, which can uplift SDR content to HDR. And there's support for 10-bit color as well. That's over 1 billion colors. The color settings are pretty much the same as we've seen on recent high-end Xperias. The creator mode is very accurate, and can adjust the display's colors between sRGB and DCI-P3 as needed. The default standard mode is punchier overall. There's also a toggle for auto creator mode in the standard mode. It'll kick in for certain content, giving you the best of both worlds. On top of that, further tweaking of the colors is possible within the white balance menu. Let's touch upon the high refresh rate. If enabled, the phone uses 120Hz most of the time. Unlike some competitors, it won't dial down to save energy. It will go back to 60Hz only within certain apps, or for video playback. There is support for high frame rate gaming though. You can enable the 120Hz display for supported titles through the Game Enhancer settings. You can also force it to 120Hz on a per game basis, just to be sure. Within the Game Enhancer, there's even a 240Hz option too. That's what Sony calls blur reduction, and it uses frame interpolation to reduce blur within 120Hz mode. When it comes to refresh rate on the Xperia 1 Mark IV, we did encounter one annoying issue. If the phone heats up, the 120Hz mode is actually automatically disabled, dropping you down to 60Hz and 60 FPS. This happened a few times to us even at room temperature, and it can take up to 5 minutes to go back to normal. This ties into the phone's thermal management. With its Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 chipset, the Xperia 1 Mark IV has the most powerful Android hardware, but the performance is limited because it throttles quite heavily. After just 10 minutes of testing, the Xperia 1 Mark IV went down to about 65% of max CPU performance, and the GPU output was cut in half. That sounds bad, but there's so much power there to begin with that even with the throttling, games still run well, and the dip in performance isn't that noticeable. And the phone never got uncomfortably hot while we were using it. But still, the Xperia 1 Mark IV handles thermals and throttling worse than any of its competitors. Back to the game enhancer. It has two main interfaces. The first is a game hub/launcher, through which you'll find the performance profiles that you can tweak for each game. The second interface is an overlay that you can open in-game. It's like what you'd find on the previous model, with features like focus settings which can silence notifications while gaming. And there's HS or heat suppression power control. With this on, you can plug in the phone to provide just enough power to play your game, without charging the battery in the process, as this creates more heat. Speaking of the battery, the Xperia 1 Mark IV has a 5000 mAh capacity, 10% larger than last year, and the battery life is better too. It was able to score an endurance rating of 100 hours in our proprietary tests. This year Sony is taking cues from Samsung and Apple, and we don't get a charger included in the box. There's support for 30 watts of USB power delivery charging, and with such an adapter, we were able to charge the phone from 0 to 47% in half an hour. This result is in line with the competition. The phone also supports wireless charging at up to 15 watts. The Xperia 1 Mark IV's interface is quite similar to other recent Xperia phones, a very stock-feeling Android 12 with some proprietary Sony apps and features sprinkled in. One such feature is the multi-window switch. It's basically two task switchers stacked on top of each other, meant for navigating between and opening apps in split-screen mode. SideSense is another of the in-house Sony features. A handle on the side of the phone opens up a menu of shortcuts to apps and features, most of them user-configurable. Sony also told us about a couple of new services that'll be available. Music Pro is a paid service where you record audio like singing and upload it into the cloud. It's processed there and then comes back to you with studio-like quality. And then there's Bravia Core. It's a streaming service that's coming from Bravia TVs to Xperia phones for the first time. You can watch Sony movies and a bunch of other content, and the Xperia 1 Mark IV comes with a 1-year subscription included. Finally, let's get into Sony's extensive suite of camera apps. The default one is Photo Pro, and in its basic mode you get a zoom selector, and several sliders with options for things like aspect ratio, flash, bokeh, and white balance. Clicking on the More button will get you some extra features on top of that. And then you can also scroll from the basic mode to the Pro section of this app, which includes a few modes, including auto and manual. And there's a memory recall function too. These get a different looking interface. The next app we'll talk about is Cinema Pro. You can create separate video projects here, and you have plenty of controls to play with, including the resolution and the frame rate, shutter speed, white balance, and ISO. All of the videos from this app come out in a cinematic 21:9 aspect ratio. One of Cinema Pro's most useful features is the ability to rack focus between preset focus distances, A and B. You even get control over the duration of the transition. One major omission of the app in general though is the lack of focus peaking, which would really help out when taking manual focus. Next is the Video Pro app. Like Cinema Pro, it offers more controls over the regular Photo Pro app. But here you have more freedom when it comes to aspect ratio, and the footage doesn't need to be color graded afterwards. That makes it more suitable for direct uploads to your favorite video sharing platforms. Actually, live streaming is one of the things that Sony wanted to focus on this year with the Xperia 1 Mark IV. Sony has made an exclusive deal with YouTube, and every Xperia 1 Mark IV owner will be able to live stream there, even if they don't meet the required minimum number of subscribers. You can even stream with a Sony Alpha camera if you have the appropriate cable to attach it to your Xperia smartphone. Now onto the cameras. The Xperia 1 Mark IV's triple camera setup is similar to the Mark III's, but the telephoto has been updated and now provides seamless optical zoom. Last year you got 2 fixed magnification levels, and you again see 2 selections here at 3.5 times and 5.2 times. But there's also continuous optical zoom for everything in between. Also, all cameras now support steady shot with flawless eye. That's improved stability in low light conditions. Eye autofocus and real-time object tracking are now available across all cameras too. The 3 cameras on the back include a 12-megapixel main cam, the 12-megapixel telephoto, and 12-megapixel ultrawide camera. There's also a TOF camera for bokeh, as well as an RGB IR sensor for white balance adjustment. During the day, the main camera takes outstanding photos that are incredibly detailed and noise-free. The sharpness is well balanced, and fine details and foliage have a natural-looking rendition. White balance is spot on here, and the colors are true to life. The dynamic range is also praiseworthy, wide but not over the top. There is no dedicated portrait mode, but these are the results with bokeh enabled in the camera settings. These are good, though the subject separation is far from ideal, despite having a TOF camera to help. With the telephoto cam at 3.5 times zoom, you get a decent amount of detail, but these photos aren't as sharp as the main cams. The colors match though, and you again get a natural rendition. The dynamic range is wide too. The quality goes down the more you zoom in. At 5.2 times, the photos are softer and a bit noisier. You also get some purple fringing around some objects. But still, these are good with enough detail, and you again get great colors, wide dynamic range, and natural looking processing. And here's what you get in between at 4.4 times zoom. The quality is as good as the 5.2 times samples, but with a bit more detail and sharpness. Photos taken with the ultra-wide cam are impressive as well, with abundant detail and good sharpness in the center. The rendition is again incredibly natural, with great looking foliage. Noise is low and the colors are true to life, and the dynamic range is excellent for this sort of camera. It's worth noting that although the ultra-wide has autofocus, the focus distance isn't close enough for this camera to be used for macro shots. Sony doesn't do night mode, but they would argue that the Xperia 1 Mark IV doesn't need it. And that may be true, at least for the main cam. The photos we took at night are incredibly realistic, sharp, and colorful. There is a ton of resolved detail, and again the natural rendition is unmatched. The dynamic range deserves praise most of the time, though some demanding scenes do have a few clipped highlights. When zooming at night, well-lit scenes come out lovely. They're sharp and detailed with excellent color saturation, good exposure, low noise, and better than expected dynamic range. In darker situations, the photos come out darker, and they have considerable clipped highlights. They still have excellent rendition though. Low-light photos taken with the ultra-wide camera are solid. They're detailed and sharp with good noise reduction, realistic colors, and an acceptable dynamic range. They are a bit on the darker side though, and a night mode could have really helped here. For selfies, the Xperia 1 Mark IV has a new 12-megapixel front-facing cam, which is even capable of 4K video recording. We love the quality here. The subject is always well exposed in these selfies, with incredible detail and sharpness, low noise, and spot-on colors. The dynamic range is good too. Now on to video quality. All of the rear cameras can shoot in 4K at up to 120 FPS. Footage from the main camera is impressive, with enough detail and the same natural looking rendition as the stills. The noise is quite low, and there's decent dynamic range, though you may see some blown highlights from time to time. There's a new mode this year called Wide Dynamic Range. It combines multiple frames to provide a boost in the contrast, and shadows look more natural. The clouds and white objects aren't blown out either. It's best used on a tripod though, because there is no electronic stabilization with this mode on. We really like the 4K videos shot with the telephoto camera at 3.5 times zoom. They are detailed with balanced sharpness, low noise, and a natural look. The dynamic range is great, and the colors are spot on. The 5.2 times zoomed video is softer and less detailed. It is more than usable, it's colorful and has wide dynamic range, but when it comes to resolved detail and sharpness, those are lackluster. The 4K videos shot on the ultra-wide camera are excellent for this sort of cam. There's more detail than most ultra-wides, outstanding processing, and natural sharpness. And you also get accurate colors, low noise, and good dynamic range. In low light situations, footage from the main camera is usable. It offers enough detail, the exposure is okay, and the colors are true to life. There is noticeable noise, but it's tolerable. Low-light videos from the zoom camera are noisy, but there's a decent level of detail underneath, so these videos are rather usable. The low-light 4K videos from the ultra-wide camera are also usable. There is okay-ish detail and good colors, but these are quite noisy. So that's the Sony Xperia 1 Mark IV. It's among the pricier smartphones that you can buy, but with the premium price comes pretty much all the features that you could want from a flagship. This includes the 4K OLED screen, the good battery life, and the pro-oriented camera kit. You even get retro features like expandable storage and a headphone jack. We do wish that Sony hadn't followed Apple and Samsung and ditched the charger, but the biggest problem here is that the performance throttles quite a bit, and this might not be the top choice for a heavy gamer. And even outside of games, the throttling is noticeable on the screen as heat builds up and that refresh rate dips to 60 Hz. When it comes to cameras, having all these apps and options can be great for enthusiasts, but it's a bit complicated for your average point-and-shoot consumer. And in low light, you get a natural look here without night mode, and some people might prefer the kind of processing that turns night into day. Still, if you're a Sony fan that's into smartphone photography, the Xperia 1 Mark IV is definitely worth recommending. Thanks for watching guys, stay safe and see you on the next one.